Mackenzie,
What's up?
can I be really vulnerable with you for a second?
I mean, always, yeah.
I don't know how to ask this, but what exactly is a reservoir dog?
Listen, if you're not cool enough to know, you don't get to know.
Well, fuck me, right? That's what I get for trusting people.
Fair enough. Alrighty, fam. Welcome back to We Drink and We Watch Things. I'm Mackenzie.
I'm Lemar.
And we are drinking and watching apart today. This is
For the first time.
for the first time. Are you having separation anxiety? I am.
I am. Did you guys know you can record podcasts on the internet, or are we the first ones to discover this?
I think it's just us. I think nobody else has done this groundbreaking thing before.
Things that we have, revolutionized in this industry. Tarantino-vember, first to do that.
For real.
Recording on the internet, first to do that. You don't have to be in the same room.
No, you don't. You don't. It is weird though, I will say. We're trying to recreate the same experience, but I had to pour just my own drink today, and that was weird. So
Typically I pour all of Mackenzie's drinks.
obviously that's his actual job here. Duh. No, well, with that in mind, what are you drinking? I didn't make your drink this week. I need deets.
Yeah, so I didn't make a drink. I really just popped a bottle. Janelle had the bright idea of, well, why don't you do a blonde ale, as in Mr. Blonde? I decided not to go with one of the colorful names of the characters, but instead a different reference of Mr. Pink's, because in the opening scene, he says, when I order a coffee at a diner, I expect it to be refilled 6 times.
Oh my fucking God, that
seemed
guy.
Excessive to me.
Excessive.
But so what I've got here is from Bottle Logic Brewing, one of my favorite breweries from Anaheim, and this is called Stronger Than Fiction. It is a coffee coconut strong ale, so I got my coffee reference there. What are you drinking? What do you got over there?
I also did a beer. It feels like a beer movie. Just quick sidebar. Usually we try to do a cool call to the movie, right? With a cocktail or with a whatever. They don't really drink any alcohol in this movie, so I was like, what are we going to do? And I just thought, what would these guys drink is really the conclusion that I came to was beer. And I'm actually not a big IPA person. There's literally one on the planet that I like. And I almost drank it. And I immediately was like, these guys would make fun of me so hard for drinking this IPA bitch beer. I just thought that I would get roasted at that table with those guys.
I mean, in 1991, a lot of them probably didn't even know what an IPA was.
But that's what I mean. If they were around now and all they saw were IPAs everywhere, I feel like we would be getting judged really hard. And I just didn't want to be judged at this table. So I felt like an amber ale was the way to go. Shout out to Schilling in Colorado. They do some awesome beer, and this is a really, really good, smooth amber ale.
Okay.
Also, other sidebar before I forget, I think we need to give credit where it's due to Janelle's recurring appearance on this podcast without actually being on the podcast and generating such incredible ideas. So I just want to shout out Janelle. We love you. Your ideas are great. Every time I hear them, I'm super excited to hear them. So cheers to you.
She has ideas. She'll never hear this. She doesn't listen to this shit.
Oh, well, fair enough. I mean, she doesn't want to hear you more than she has to.
I said, babe, I'm starting a podcast. And she said, are you on it? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then I don't want to listen.
Fair. Text me, girl. I'll tell you what it's like to work with your man. All that to say, it's actually, I'm ready with my beer. I'm super excited to talk about this, honestly. We have a little spiel for you. So if you don't remember, we are in Tarantino-vember. Number 4.
And you got the name down. It took 4 weeks and you have
and
got
now
the
we're about
name
to quit.
down.
And now we're about to quit doing it.
Until
next year. Maybe I'll get it really smooth from the top next year. But yeah, Tarantino-vember number 4, our final installment. We are talking Reservoir Dogs, the OG, the first one, his first outing as a director, I should say, asterisk. He had obviously done some other things, but as a director, this is his first one. So super excited to talk about it, but we also need to give you a quick spiel about it. So as a reminder, we spoil the shit out of these movies. I'm sure you're sick of hearing that at this point, but I don't know. Maybe this is your first time here. So we spoil the shit out of these movies real quick. Going to give you a reminder of the plot. 6 criminals with pseudonyms, and each strangers to one another, are hired to carry out a robbery. The heist is ambushed by police, and the gang are forced to shoot their way out. At their warehouse rendezvous, the survivors, realizing they were set up, try to find the traitor in their midst. Super simple recap, but I actually think it
Yeah,
hits
that was
all the
like
high
two
notes.
sentences. You
Yeah.
lost me at pseudonym. I can't wait to find out what that is. That's
Yeah.
exciting.
You don't need to learn how words work, Lemar. It's fine.
You did say that this was Tarantino's first film that he directed. It was actually wasn't supposed to be. He
It
had
wasn't supposed
actually
to be.
self-financed a film, I think 3 years prior to this,
Yeah.
and I believe there was like a fire or something, and he lost essentially 2/3. So it didn't end up being a feature; it ended up being a short. But this was almost his second film.
Yeah. And he actually did. I actually haven't watched it, so I feel ill equipped to speak to it, but he did a short version of this film that grew into this film. So,
Oh, okay.
kind of, yeah. So, this is the fleshed out idea that he, fully wrote out, fully directed. And he's like known to make a joke on this set of he was like saying that he was the least experienced person on the set. He's got this like killer cast
Yeah.
around him. And I think he was saying him and I want to say it was Eddie Bunker because they were both like pretty new to filming. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, we're the two least experienced people on this show.
Yes.
So, but for his first time out, let's just start there. Pretty fucking solid. Pretty
Pretty
fucking
damn
solid.
good. And to his credit, which is the opposite of what we get from Tarantino nowadays, he kept it fucking short and sweet. This is about an hour and 39 minutes. I really, after the 3 movies we did to start the month, it was wonderful to sit down and know that I only had to sit through an hour and 40 minutes this time.
I know. Like, listen, y'all, we love it, but it takes work to watch all these movies. And that was a nice reprieve. I think a big part of that is you never see the heist.
Yes, I like that about this film a lot. You see a lot of the stuff that happens leading up to it. You see a lot of the stuff that happens after it, but they never actually show you the heist, which is crazy for what would be considered by most to be a heist film.
Well, and it has won like all kinds of, just kind of culty fan lists for like best heist film. It's really interesting that it is for being one that unlike say like a Heat, you never see it, but I think that's part of the appeal. So yeah, his first outing, definitely shorter, heist movie without a heist. It was also co-written, I will say, just to give credit where it's due again at the top, by him and Roger Avery. So
I was not aware of that. And I know I have a lot of friends who, prior to Tarantino having 10 films, the question was, well, which do you like better, Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs? And at least back then, it was sort of 50-50 split. There are people that swear by this one, despite, I think Pulp Fiction is leaps and bounds better. I think both are great.
Yeah.
But I have friends that probably to this day, their opinion is Reservoir Dogs is the best of Tarantino's movies.
Yeah, and I wonder if that is like some of the nostalgia of it being the first one, because I think what I will say on this watch, I think noticed more of the flaws in the filmmaking than you normally would and that you expect to. And maybe that is by comparison to just watching all of his really matured films of some of his best work and putting those side by side and going, ooh, like I can see where we could have done better here or there. I would almost say, objectively speaking, this is not the best film. And there are real, I think, limits to how it had to be made. Again, primarily budget related. So I think it's easy to say that his later films are notably better. But to your point, his second film is leaps and bounds better. So it's like he learned so much right away. And the success of this film got him the budget to do that one.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
He definitely, it feels like we were seeing so many shades of what he would become as a filmmaker. And we're seeing him sort of, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And there's so many things that he tries in this that don't pan out completely. We could talk, we're going to get to the opening in a second. I think the entire them walking in slow motion for the opening credits is a little cheeseball to me. But, early 90s filmmaking, that was probably a sign of the time.
Kind of on brand, to be honest. Yeah.
And then later in his other films, he would do similar things of like creating these badass characters, but it doesn't feel as kind of ham-fisted as that moment does for me.
I mean, what director hasn't been a sucker for a slow-mo moment? You know what I mean? Like, I think a slow-mo moment makes you just look so cool, and it's like so fun to do. So I kind of get how he was like sucked into doing that in that moment. Yeah. But I totally agree with you that it's a little cheesy. There's also, so Eddie Bunker, really quick, is actually the true real life criminal who is in the cast. and he plays Mr. Blue, in case
But
you.
I saw that factoid. Did he do something similar to the, not as in getting, 6 of his friends killed,
He
but
was
did he
he
steal
didn't do
jewels
this
and diamonds?
story. So this story is
Okay.
completely independent of him. He
Okay.
was just kind of hired as a consultant in general. And he's actually done that on a few films. But he was the youngest felon in San Quentin. So like he's done his time literally. But he said that there were aspects of this that just really didn't hold water as far as what you would actually do as a criminal, right? You wouldn't all wear matching suits and go to
Right.
breakfast the day
Talk
of a
about
heist
inconspicuous.
and like hang out in a public place together, and protecting one another's names is not the only cover you would want for yourselves as
Right.
a group of people putting on a heist. So but Eddie Bunker was like, listen, it's a fun flick, but like it's bullshit. Like that would never
Yes.
happen. And I think that's at the heart of it, right? Like that's the heart of the slow-mo. That's the heart of the outfits, right? It's like, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a little heisty, a little edgy, a little 90s cheeseball, I
A
think.
little over the top. Yeah. Now, we mentioned this at the very beginning, sort of in jest, but to my knowledge, do we know what a reservoir dog is? Do you have any backstory to this title?
I do, but I will say there are multiple theories about how this title happened, to be fair.
Okay.
So Quentin has been asked about this, and he has told different stories each time, culminating, I think, in 2 major theories about this, the name of this film. One is he supposedly went to a production company and saw a bunch of unsolicited scripts under a pile that was labeled Reservoir Dogs.
Okay.
And they're fighting for attention.
For the people that are, for all of us that aren't morons, can you re-explain what a reservoir is, please?
He's like,
It's
not
3
for
syllables.
not for me at all. I would never need
Okay.
that explanation.
I know what a dog is. That part's easy.
You're doing great.
Cool.
But it's a source of water, right? It's a water supply. And the implication is that you have a bunch of dogs in the bottom of this reservoir, in the bottom of this tank, who are trapped and fighting for attention or a way out. Right. Another one was that he suggested somebody watch a certain movie. It was, I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's kind of a little known film that he suggested. And the person replied back to him and said, I don't want to see no Reservoir Dogs. So he said both as origins for potentially this name. So it's really, to this day, it's very unclear as to why he named it what he named it.
I wonder if this is just some old phrase that doesn't get you, but I feel like everything ends up,
I think so.
if that's the case, it usually ends up on Urban Dictionary or Wikipedia. Like you can dig into what these random phrases from yesteryear, like that feels like something that would have been a term that would have been used in like the 1920s in the South, of like, oh, reservoir dogs, like people fighting over,
or even yeah, something very obscure or niche or like regional. I definitely do feel like it's some kind of regional phrase. I can go get my Why We Say What We Say nerdy book.
Isn't that the name of our podcast?
Find it.
No, wait, we do.
No, I don't know. I forget the name of our podcast half the time.
So do you want to dig into the actual plot? Like, let's go through the story beat by beat. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we got a lot to touch on all the beats of this story. Starting us off at the top, like, again, kind of a notorious, famous, whatever you want to call it, opening scene of them just sitting around this table.
Classic
and having this conversation.
Tarantino-ism of just, let's shoot the shit at a table and see what we talk about.
And there's a lot of theories here about this film in particular, that the script is a lot of improv as well.
Really?
But I don't buy that, to be honest. I was going to ask you what you thought, because that whole conversation feels very intentional. But when you read reviews about it, or even just commentary about it, there are a fair number of people who are like, you can tell this is a chill cast who's kind of riffing on their lines and yada yada. And I don't know, they land in such a way, to me,
I
don't
disagree. I think that the shot that's taking place there, where it's sort of circling the table, I think there's a very intentional flow to that, and where people are when they deliver their lines. I like the thought. It's fun to think of. It feels like an improvisational conversation, because it feels like just something random you would talk about,
feels authentic.
Yeah, it feels like something that you would just shoot the shit about, and it's not that meaningful of a conversation. There's no greater meaning there. But yeah, I don't buy that.
But there is so much meaning there, and that's I think a great argument in your favor too, of there's no way, because it feels natural to your point, but there is a lot of subtext in that conversation.
Let's hear the subtext. Are you talking about specifically the Madonna conversation or the tipping conversation or
Both, all of it. I think the whole opening scene is full
okay.
of subtext, all kinds of subtext, or even just commentary, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, definitely the Madonna conversation. They're talking about like a virgin. Again, notorious part of the script in this conversation. And, they're talking about how what like a virgin means. And, it hurts like the first time in the grossest way possible. And I just have in my notes like, ew, ew. But I think some
You're
of the
supposed to support other
subtext a
women
little.
though, Mackenzie. Like Madonna wrote that song fair and square. So
She explicitly told Quentin Tarantino that that's not what it
but
means.
I did see that she sent him like an autographed copy of her album or something, but
She
did
did.
say this is
She
not
was like,
what the
here's
song is about.
Right. She was like, it's not about a
yeah.
dick. Like she literally was like, listen, it's not about a dick, but here, yeah, have the album. Take another listen, probably. Like, listen again, dumbass. No, but she says it's not about that. So that's why I was like, ew, why you gotta make it weird, bro? Why you make
for
it
what
gross?
it's worth,
But
we're gonna
on brand.
I don't want to spoil this for you because this is my biggest takeaway from watching it this time. We're gonna get in about 10 minutes. I'm gonna drop some bombs about the subtext I think I see in this film. So to be fair, Quentin had this theory about Madonna. I'm going to turn it right around on him and tell you what I see in this movie.
Oh, number one, I'm super excited. Number two, other subtext of this conversation is that Chris Penn is in this movie, who is the brother of Sean Penn, who was married to Madonna. And I don't think that's unintentional that we're having a conversation about a Madonna song, like this is kind of like a fun little sidebar, I think, as well. So I think it's a really funny conversation. It's definitely gross, but it's funny. And I don't know, not to say bros will be bros, but bros will be bros sometimes. And it's kind of a typical, I don't know, dude conversation about a song. And I just love also that they're like, what do you think it means? What do you think it means? And they're having this debate about this song at breakfast. Like,
yeah, we're getting ready to go rob a bank, but let's talk about this.
Let's debate about this song. Exactly. Like they're just so chill, for what they're about to do. And I think that speaks to this is just another day of the week for them.
Another job.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we're circling around the table here, we meet basically our entire main cast in this first scene. We go around the table.
Pretty much, yeah.
We meet Mr. White, Mr. Harvey Keitel. And I didn't realize he was a co-producer on this until I did a little bit of research. And essentially, he like quadrupled the budget of this film. He read the script.
I think at least, and then some. It was like a $30,000 budget, and it went to $1.5 million after he got involved.
Yeah. So if you like this movie, you owe a little bit of that to Harvey Keitel for jumping in and throwing some money at it.
But he asked to be in it. I think that's the really interesting part of it. It's like, yeah, he became a producer for all the reasons that you just said. But he sought it out. Like Quentin basically was like, I wouldn't even have asked. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't have thought I could have gotten a Harvey Keitel in this movie. And I think it's awesome that he did.
Yeah, you got Mr. Orange, aka Tim Roth, perpetually bloody in this. They should have called him Mr. Crimson.
Right?
But
he should have been Mr. Pink, to be honest.
He's just covered all movie in blood. To the point where apparently he was like sticking to the floor at times, like between cuts, because the blood, whatever the corn syrup and stuff he was using they would have to come and pull him up off the floor because he was just stuck to the ground.
He's just stuck to that like wood that he's laying on. Ugh, gross.
You got Mr. Michael Madsen playing Mr. Blonde. And what I think, I've never been a huge Michael Madsen guy, to be honest. I think a lot of the stuff he did after this was fine. He's got little bit parts in a few other Tarantinos. We talked about Hateful Eight last week. He's in Sin City, which is Robert Rodriguez. But he just feels a little over the top in those. In this one, I just wrote the note of he is the coolest in this movie that he will ever be. All sociopathic tendencies aside, I'm like, Michael Madsen in this, as a young dude, very cool.
He oozes cool. I'll give you that. He does ooze cool. He oozes crazy, like you said. He oozes sociopath, but he does ooze cool, and just like nothing ruffles his feathers, even things that should.
Yes, and we'll get to more of him as we get into the plot. We've got the one and only Mr. Steve Buscemi here as Mr. Pink. Doesn't want to be called Mr. Pink, but doesn't really have a choice in the matter.
Little
and
bitch
we talked about
it,
Hateful Eight. We talked about Hateful Eight last week, and I never made this parallel, but of Walton Goggins, and I'm just like, Tarantino likes to put some weird looking gentlemen in some of his movies.
He does, and maybe weird's like I hate to say something negative about somebody's appearance, something they can't control.
Unique,
but yeah,
that's what I meant.
And I know
to
you
say.
didn't mean it maliciously. I just mean, what is the word? Because it's just unique. It's different. It's very different looking.
Well, I mean, you want to stand out in Hollywood. There's certain ways to do that. Everyone's beautiful, not every,
Right.
why be beautiful?
And think
That
about
that
those
sets
people
you
who
apart.
get those parts over and over, like probably at least partially due to their uniqueness, their unique look.
Yeah. You mentioned Eddie Bunker
Yep.
playing Mr. Blue, the real life felon turned actor in this case. You mentioned Chris Penn playing nice guy Eddie, the son of the mob boss. We didn't mention Quentin Tarantino himself, already making a habit of shoving himself into his own movies
You know,
as
he
Mr.
wanted to be
Brown.
Mr. Pink, so he cut his role down quite a bit.
It's like I think he's only directing to try and further his career as an actor. Maybe he's like, you know what? Let me just get a
He's
little
like, if
better
I
every
direct
movie.
myself, then they have to give me the job, you know?
Yeah. And then finally, who I would consider our last main cast member of this whole thing is Mr. Lawrence Tierney as Joe, who is sort of the mob boss. Now, did you read up at all on how big of a pain in the ass this guy was on set?
100%. I think it's pretty legendary, actually. I don't know that I read up on it so much as I remember people bitching about him quite a bit. I mean, they will still bitch about it in current interviews about this
Huh.
movie 20 years later. Like Steve Buscemi has said it, Michael Madsen has said it, Quentin Tarantino has said it. Like we're talking 20, 30 years on, they're like, God, that guy was a fucking asshole.
Yeah, in a movie full of dicks, this guy in real life managed to be the biggest dick of all.
Yeah.
Apparently, he almost came to blows with Tarantino himself, like a physical altercation, because
Yeah.
he was, I guess, in his throughout his entire acting career, he was a noted, alcoholic,
Hmm.
unfortunately, but let his temper get the best of him. He got arrested during the filming of this for getting drunk and shooting at his nephew.
Yeah. And he had to get picked up from booking and driven straight to set.
That definitely changes my view of this film a little bit when I'm watching
Yeah.
it, because I'm just like, Joe is he's probably, I guess aside from Mr. Blonde, he's probably the scariest character in this whole thing as far as just the
He's
intimidation
scary but
factor.
stable, yeah, so it's
Yeah, yeah.
almost different, yeah, like
He's a
you said.
mastermind.
Yeah, definitely not who this person was at all. I think he got fired off the film, if I recall correctly. I don't remember exactly, but he also almost came to blows with Michael Madsen, who by all accounts is a pretty chill dude, like in real life.
Yeah, and when I say I'm not a huge Michael Madsen fan, it's not for lack of him being a chill dude.
No,
It's just
yeah.
that his acting ability doesn't do a
No,
lot for
he's
me. But
not the
in this,
best
yeah.
actor.
And if you want my exhibit A, just go watch the first like 6 minutes of Sin City. So let's go to the second half of that conversation. We've met our entire cast, aside from, some little cameos here or there. We also have the cop that's going to come into play later, but the tipping debate. What subtext did you read into that? I'm really curious here.
Well, I don't know that it was like subtext so much as it was straight up fucking overt of the
Mm-hmm.
actual debate that every reasonable person who tips has had with a monster who doesn't. And I just remember like hearing that again in great detail. One, it goes on for a long time. And this is where I would argue maybe subtext of Quentin has got to be making a statement here. He's like, listen, this is for the benefit of the masses that you need to learn that tipping is important, because it does. It goes on for a while. And I of course agree with everyone who's ganging up on Mr. Pink that you need to tip. And yeah, to your point earlier, 6 times to refill your coffee, sir?
That's the expectation. So then we get that iconic opening credits of the cast walking and they're all matching suits about to go rob a bank in
Yes.
slow motion. Anything else to add there? I don't have much there, but I remember watching this and thinking it was much cooler when I was 20 years old as opposed to when I watched it the other night.
I don't, other than what we already said, where it's like such a sucker move. And I mean that in the best way of like, you got to do a slow-mo moment here and there once in a while. So I get that. It's kind of fun. It's kind of over the top. But I need to go back to the coffee for a second. Okay.
Oh,
Not just the
geez.
coffee,
Oh,
the breakfast. No, listen,
okay.
I need to know. I wanted to ask you this before we move on. He does the world's smallest violin thing. And I need to know, is this the first iteration of that? I did not look it up on purpose. I know that we as kids in our youth heard this a lot.
All the time.
All the time. Is this where that came from?
I'm sure it had been used, by other people, but maybe
I guess,
this is the
was
first
it made
appearance
popular
in
by
a
this?
film.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I have no
wouldn't be
idea. But
surprised. Tarantino strikes me as the kind of person who wouldn't want to use a gag or a joke or a line that someone
That's
else had already
overdone.
used, unless it's
Yeah.
a direct homage. But for something like that that's meant to be humorous, I don't think he would want to try and steal something that had already been in another movie.
Or that's just like really popular. I mean, sure, I
Yeah.
think maybe it's a phrase that gets used now and again, but I think this is maybe where it was popularized. And that was,
Hmm.
I know people my age now who will still make that reference. And I'm like, look at you go, Quentin, with your world's smallest violin origination. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had to touch on that. The
Yeah.
other thing I liked was, as much as he clearly was a pain in the ass, Lawrence Tierney, I just love that his ending of that whole debate is like, just give your fucking buck.
Yeah, like,
Like,
I bought your breakfast.
I bought your fucking breakfast. Just give your buck. Shut the fuck up. Let's move on. And I thought it was the greatest way to settle that debate.
Yeah. So we jump from those opening credits, and then we get sort of the audio cut. You get a cameo from comedian Stephen Wright there with his notoriously deep voice as the DJ in this film.
Yeah, I was gonna say we got to touch on Stephen Wright. We didn't list him in the cast at the beginning, but definitely have to touch on him. You don't have to even know his comedy or
Mm-hmm.
be a fan of his to just know his voice
Yep.
immediately. As soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, there he is, there he is. So yeah, I loved that addition kind of throughout.
Yeah, yeah. Leave it to Tarantino to sort of like make a character who's not a character, but you don't need that DJ
No,
necessarily, but somehow it makes the universe this is taking place in feel more real.
yeah,
They actually, do mention the radio station at the diner scene of like, oh, look at what songs they're playing here and
yeah.
what songs they're playing here. So it's in a way, he is a character in the film without having much of an impact aside from queuing up the music that we're going to hear later, which does become important.
Does become important. Yeah, I agree with you. He's a character without ever being seen.
Yeah.
And I love those little cameos, like you said. But I do think like the whole thing, even from the very beginning, you can feel the budget of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it dissipates pretty quickly. I don't know if you felt that of just like, yeah, we know this was done on a tight budget, but you again get into the story and the writing quickly enough that I think it's kind of an immediate distraction almost of
Mm-hmm.
shit starts going down pretty quick, you know?
Yeah, they throw you right into it.
Throw you
And
right into it.
we'll get to the fact that we're going to arrive at the actual warehouse where the majority of this film takes
Mm-hmm.
place. And to your point of the budget, 80% of this film, I would say 70% of this film takes place in one shooting location.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that was just a story decision necessarily.
Mm-mm.
But I want to talk really quickly about the first scene post opening credits where we hear the dialogue from Mr. Orange and Mr. White in the car
Mm-hmm.
before we actually see them. We get this transition
Yeah.
from the music into their dialogue, and we're going to see the video later, which I think is cool that it circles back to that scene. But here's my big takeaway from this watch through of Reservoir Dogs. So
I'm on the
this
edge
is
of
for
my
you,
seat.
Madonna. Is Reservoir Dogs, could any part of you interpret this as a very queer friendly film?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I hadn't considered that till you just said it, so forgive me for the delay there. But yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I shouldn't say I didn't consider it at all because there are a couple of moments, of course, that are a little like they make reference to some sort of homosexual
Mhm.
leaning one way or the other, whether it's
Mhm.
making fun of it or blowing right past it or whatever. But it touches on the reality of homosexuality being a thing in a very accepting way, and I think that's great for, again, especially an early 90s film where not quite as pervasive as we would have liked for it to be quite as accepting. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it definitely can, and I think there's an immediate bond with
Mhm.
Mr. White and Mr. Orange, which is maybe where you're going with this,
Yes.
that alludes to the possibility of that for sure.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be, one of those college film majors who's writing an essay about why these two characters are, factually homosexual. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say that, but I will say after watching this opening scene and then tracking it through the rest of the film, I do have some evidence to present as we go along that might have been Tarantino's intent. And to your point,
Yeah.
like, we associate Quentin Tarantino with this sort of machismo of these very, what's the word I'm looking for? Just over the
Masculine,
top masculine
testosterone,
characters, murderers and psychopaths and
Yeah.
professional hitmen and all of that. I find it very interesting the amount of sort of things that I came across in here. And it starts with that first scene of them in the car. And clearly he's comforting his friend. There's no doubt
Yeah.
that they are friends. They've sort of moved past the fake stage names that they're using for this heist. And he's holding his hand. Mr. White is trying to comfort him. And they arrive at the warehouse. Mr. White drags him inside, lays him down. And Mr. Orange says aloud, "I'm scared. Please hold me." Again, you can
Yeah.
interpret this in many ways. I'm sure that's been
Sure.
said by folks at war and folks that have been shot and have that fear of death, like, hold me,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one else here. We get the
Yeah.
scene of, Mr. White. It's kind of played as a gag, and it's kind of cute, actually, where he combs Mr. Orange's hair just to make the
Yeah.
situation a little less
Yeah.
scary for him, and they both giggle a little bit.
Little anecdotal moment there for me. It reminded me so much of my grandfather. Rest in peace, David Garcia. One of my favorite people in the world. He combed his hair in every situation. I mean, in the middle of church, at dinner, when somebody was upset, when somebody had died. That's what made me think of it. Like, Grandpa would do that. Grandpa would like comfort you by combing his hair.
All right. Well, shout out, Grandpa. You're a legend. And let's jump back into the story here. So, we get this opening scene of White and Orange reaching the warehouse. Orange is bleeding out on the floor. White is comforting him. And then Mr. Pink shows up.
Can we talk really quick, though, about the getting to the warehouse? Because that is something I need to touch on. And I don't know if this is a production thing or is this just me being a speed demon, but I was enraged slightly by how slow Harvey Keitel, aka Mr. White, is driving. Did you notice the background is going so slow? And I did not notice this on previous watches, but I was like, this motherfucker is dying and you are driving 5 miles per hour, Gramps. Speaking of grandpas, my grandpa drove really fast. What are you doing?
I mean, but we did point out that there wasn't much of a budget on this, so maybe they just couldn't afford one of those guys in front that's actually driving the car while the actor's pretending to drive the car. Maybe Harvey Keitel had to drive safe because he was really driving while he was acting. It's hard to multitask.
I mean, I would not at all be surprised, but I can tell you that it was very distracting to me because I was like, if this is a true emergency, which of course it is, you're hauling fucking ass. And I was super offended by the lack of hauling ass. But yes, anyway, they do get to this warehouse eventually. But speaking of other slow things, the other thing that upset me about that was once they got to the warehouse, he does do this very sweet thing. He combs his hair. I love this moment for them. But as soon as Mr. Pink makes his appearance and comes on in and is like, hey, we have a rat in the house, right? And like they go off to have this conversation separate from Mr. Orange so as to kind of hopefully at least keep the stress away from him. Totally get it of let's go have this separate conversation and, kind of protect this guy who's literally dying from the stress of that. But they were gone for so long.
Like he could have bled out by this point. Yeah.
Like he could have bled out while they were gone and they didn't even check on him. He sort of like they show Keitel like poking his head around the corner once or twice and sort of looking at him, but maybe not even looking at him. And I just remember being so anxious that whole time going like, are we going to check on this guy? He's bleeding out in the next room.
I thought it was interesting to watch again, second, third, fourth watch through. And if you haven't seen this, is your last warning. But knowing that Mr. Orange is the undercover, is the rat, he's a cop. Watching him during these scenes, because I noticed that as soon as Mr. Pink comes in, and I think this might just be coincidence, but Orange has his gun in his hand. As if when Mr. Pink starts talking about there being a rat, he's worried that he might have to kill these 2 guys to stop them from killing him.
Yeah.
And when they say, hey, let's go into the other room and talk, he tries to get Mr. White to stay. And I'm wondering how much of that is he's worried about what they're going to say in the other room without him being there to hear it.
Yeah, because he knows he can't get in there and he can't listen right now. And who knows if they come out and they just try to kill him. But again, there's only so much he's literally physically capable of at this moment. So he has to kind of let it happen. But I absolutely agree. I think that's part of his stress in those moments of like, how do I keep this from getting out? And how do I keep them from figuring this out about me? And this is always hard to do, I think, in retrospect. But do you feel like you had suspicions in your very first watch that it was Mr. Orange, or are you just seeing some of these things now?
I'm noticing it now. I think the film does a great job of throwing you for a loop that first time through because you assume, well, the guy that got shot, he's not going to be the cop. But I actually thought this was interesting on this watch where
Mm-hmm.
White kind of says, hey, it's, he's defending him to Mr. Pink and says, like, I saw him get shot. He doesn't let Pink know that he was shot by a random bystander.
But he says it earlier very subtly. He says, she shot me. Did you believe she was going to shoot me? Mr. Orange does say that. And
Yeah.
he says something, and I don't remember the exact line, but he says something about her having a baby or something about a baby or a kid or something like that. I can't remember what the phrase is. So I never assumed that a cop shot him, because that would be an indicator that he was.
Isn't that a little sexist of you, though, to assume that there's no lady cops?
No, but I'm saying he meant the mentioning of the baby. The mentioning of, like,
cops are allowed
she
to
had
have
a
kids.
baby.
Maybe it was bring your daughter to work day. I'm sorry.
What cop is bringing her daughter to this work day of all work days?
The day that we're gonna have the sting. Come on,
the day that
Charlotte.
we're gonna have the sting operation. Get in the back, baby. Let's go with mom for a ride along. Yeah. No, this did not feel like the day for that to me. So I just remember that cueing me of, like, it couldn't have been a cop. So it doesn't. I don't know that I would say that I knew it for sure, but I remember being frustrated that Mr. White wouldn't allow for the fact, because he was like, well, he got shot. If it was somebody,
that's why I think that White is allowing this bond they have, whether you think it's just 100%. Friends or something else, to cloud his judgment.
It totally is. I totally agree with that. 100%. I think Mr. White and him have bonded over the course of the prep for this heist. And yeah, that is absolutely clouding his judgment. He's not even considering the possibility.
Yeah. And the fact that he doesn't point that out to Pink at all. He just says he was shot. As if that absolves him.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. He makes a point not to say by whom. Totally. Yeah. Totally.
So we get our first official flashback of the movie. It's fairly brief. It's really just going back to post-heist of seeing how Pink made his way to the warehouse. We do get our very first Quentin Tarantino Wilhelm scream in this scene. Of him pushing someone randomly and them letting out this classic scream that you've heard in, dozens of films to this point. So I thought that was fun. Anything to say about that flashback? It wasn't super long or eventful.
It wasn't super long. I remember literally writing in my notes, like, these fucking cops can't run for shit, and they're not even donut cops. They're like thin dudes, and they all just look like very lackluster running. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah. I was just like, this is a weak ass chase. That's my literal only note. This is a weak ass chase.
Yes. I will say the chase itself is pretty well shot. And then we jump back to the warehouse where, as we said, they're sort of debating. They get into an argument. And then we go to a White flashback. So we see his sort of experience here. And a couple things I wanted to call out here were that he mentions a Marcellus Spivey, and I'm just wondering, does Tarantino love the name Marcellus?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is in my notes as well. One, Marcellus Wallace from Pulp Fiction, as we know, who appears in the next film. But also, he wrote True Romance, which is Drexel Spivey. And that's played by Gary Oldman. So yeah, I absolutely think it's an homage to his other work for sure.
Yeah, I think that, now is this is the last week of Tarantino-vember, so we might as well go ahead and have this conversation. We talked about Red Apples last week, but the potential relations between characters in Tarantino movies. So, for example, in this, Mr. White is the brother of Jimmy in Pulp Fiction, also played by Quentin Tarantino. Don't ask me how that works, but they have the same last name. So again, you could say it's a coincidence, but why the hell would Tarantino use the exact same last name in consecutive films? I don't know, unless he thought there was some sort of relation there.
Well, it's Vic Vega and Vincent Vega that stand out for me. I didn't actually even notice the Mr. White one, but I did notice the Vega one. And he's talked about, well, I don't think it's him actually, but it was like Michael Madsen has talked about how they had talked about doing a brother film, because they are brothers. They're established. Vic Vega and Vincent Vega are established to be brothers, and they had talked about doing a prequel.
Yeah, it depends on who you believe. Other people say that originally Michael Madsen was supposed to play Vincent in Pulp Fiction, but because he couldn't shoot or couldn't get any scheduling, that's when John Travolta was brought in. And then they became, so whether he was going to play the other brother or whether it was going to be some sort of prequel with Mr. Blonde in it, I have no idea, but that's a rumor as well.
I think he was gonna be. I think the story is that he was gonna be Vic Vega, which is who he is in Reservoir Dogs. But because he couldn't, they introduced Vincent Vega, his brother.
Yes.
So that was my understanding of it, at least. But yeah, there's so many cool little references to these other films. I love it a lot. But I didn't notice about Mr. White. No, I didn't even catch that on this time around.
Yeah,
So
I forget what the last name is. I would have to IMDb it, but it's like Dietrich or Dimtrick. Like it's not a fairly simple name. It's definitely the reference is meant to be there.
There is a reference to him and her though, Patricia Arquette in True Romance, Mr. White, when he's talking about the woman that he was doing some jobs with. That's her from True Romance. And and they didn't come back. So I do know about that one, but yeah, I didn't know about the other one.
Yeah, Jimmy Dimmick. Sorry,
Jimmy Dimmick. Again, okay,
one of one. It's interesting that not only does Tarantino appear in both films playing one of the brothers, but Keitel appears in both films portraying one of the brothers, and then he's the wolf, obviously, in Pulp Fiction. So we come back from the flashback, and now we get a little bit of escalation between Pink and White. It's interesting to me that the two most logical characters, what it feels like in the movie, of they're really talking through, you think there was a rat? Yes, I think there was a rat. And they're sort of trying to make sense of everything, but they're consummate professionals throughout this whole thing, but they end up drawing guns on each other. And I think what spurs that is the relationship between White and Orange, and just of them, panicking a little bit until Mr. Blonde shows up. What do you want to say about Mr. Blonde, Michael Madsen?
So many fucking feelings about this guy, not least of which about the trunk shot. We get our trunk shot from Mr. Blonde's car, which is actually Michael Madsen's car. Another budget issue there as well. But I just love that we get the classic trunk shot, and this is the first time. He, like we said earlier, I don't think we have a ton that we need to double tap here, but I will just say he does just kind of ooze cool, like we said. He seems like nothing is phasing him. He is kind of charming in this weird way, but he's also infuriating because he has these really sociopathic behaviors. Yeah. And then, of course, he's completely minimizing the blow up of this heist that he just did because I quote, "I don't like alarms."
I mean, we all have things that make us
also don't like alarms. I don't murder 30 people or whatever it ends up being. And then you never get a solid body count. I've read a lot of theories about what the body count is, but the point is he shot up a lot of fucking people because he doesn't like alarms, and because he told them not to. And it's like, listen, what's done is done. The alarm is going off. It doesn't help you to murder all these people, but he does it anyway. So again, like going back to his very sociopathic nature, it's scary. It's very scary to hear him talk about these things so calmly while sitting on a hearse. Like that's not lost on me either. He's just chilling on the top of a hearse like it's no big deal. So yeah, I think he's a really scary character, and we see that obviously right away.
Yes, I think his coolness is infuriating at times. It's crazy to see Harvey Keitel at his one of his emotional high points in this film, and he's looking for a fight. He's looking to get a reaction out of Mr. Blonde, and Mr. Blonde is just sitting there.
And he can't goad him into it.
He's just, sipping on his soda, chilling on and relaxed.
Well,
and
he literally, the opening shot, and like, man, this is where it's annoying to like be sucked into the cool. His first shot is cool, man. He's like leaning up against that pole. Mm-hmm. He's got a soda water from whatever fast food place that he just popped in to get on his way to the hideout. He's like, I can't go to the hideout without a burger and fries and a drink. And he's
a nervous eater.
He's a nervous eater is what it is. But he is chilling against that wall like nothing has happened, and he's just sipping on his drink. And it's unnerving. And I think obviously that it is meant to be. Right. Yeah. Like this is the guy who just shot everything up, and he just shows up like nothing happened and sipping on a drink and ready to just chill and wait for them. And also has no real concern about the rat situation, which is the other thing. I think he's not thinking any of it through because he doesn't really care.
And I find that honestly, if we talked earlier about how, yes, this is Tarantino's first film and he's sort of just seeing what works. And Blonde is a character who I feel it doesn't feel real to me because of that, because he's so cool, calm, and collected. And even when he goes in later in the story it's a flashback, but he's talking to Joe and Eddie about getting back to work. None of these vibes, like, it feels like a family relationship. And it's strange to me that Eddie seems to have no knowledge. Joe seems to have no knowledge of what a loose cannon this guy is. Maybe you could say it's a product of him being in prison and this being his first job out of prison. But it's just strange to me that this character, no one picks up on this psychopath tendencies until it happens twice in the same day. I don't
I
know.
think it's honestly, I think it's, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think it's simpler than that. I think it's once you do a real solid for someone and or ingratiate yourself to that person in some way, you write off a lot of other shit, right? Like once this guy went to jail for them and didn't
Yeah.
talk for them, maybe they noticed some tendencies. Maybe they had some concerns. Who knows what happened before? But the point is,
Mm-hmm.
this guy went in the slammer and he didn't give up anybody, and he did it for years. And I think that's all that matters to them, even if they were aware of these other tendencies.
I hear you. I think the thing that I like the most about what you said is that you used like the 1940s terminology of referring to prison as the slammer. I, I'm here for it. So thank you for that.
Listen, it just came out, and I thought it also really rolled off the tongue. So thank you for acknowledging it.
Yes. So we do get a flashback here of a little more backstory, as we said, on the Mr. Blonde character, of seeing his interaction. And we get a little bit more homoeroticism here, in my opinion, of him and Eddie rustling on the office of the dad. And you see this funny,
for sure.
like, playful
and
relationship.
they're talking
between the
about
two.
it. They go into some dialogue
Yeah.
about that said homoeroticism, and you can see it playing with, you're about to cross a line and it's about to be a real fight, and it just tiptoes right across that the whole time. So like the homoeroticism and almost the acceptance to some degree of the homosexuality is there, but then so is the homophobia. It's right on the other side of that line.
Look, I'm not going to say that I've done a lot of research on this kind of stuff, but isn't that fairly common, right? Like some of the people who are the most hateful and fearful of homosexuality, a lot of it comes from repression, right?
Sure.
And that might be something that's happening here. I think that in this film, maybe this is, me making up ideas on the spot, but you've got Mr. White blinded by his own feelings for Mr. Orange, whether it's friendship or something else, and him being like, well, he can't be the rat. And then you've got Eddie and Joe saying, well, Mr. Blonde would never do anything. That's like, it's these trusting relationships and friendships where both of them are so clouded. And then you get all these men who, 4 out of the 6 of them are consummate professionals, but they're going to end up killing each other over their bonds that they've established with the rest of the group.
Yeah, and I think that's really fair to say. Of this is a semi-recurring theme, and whether it is true, actual like homosexual affinity or tendencies, or if it's just these bonds that they have as, I don't know, criminals, men, whatever it is, something that is bonding them and definitely clouding their judgment, I think is fair to say. I think the only one, again, who doesn't have those ties in this moment is, though, Mr. Blonde, where what matters to him is torturing this guy for seemingly no real reason other than, he even says, I just get off on torturing cops. I'm into hurting cops. And like, I don't think that there's much more to dig into there. You know what I mean? Like, this is a sociopath. This is what this guy cares about, to, against the logic of all other things in the situation of why this could be a bad idea, why this would be, detrimental to their safety, to their cause, to their potential for being found out, arrested, charged, whatever, all the things. He doesn't really care. He just wants to torture this guy in a really morbid way. And, he's literally dancing around while he does it. So it's Stephen Wright makes his appearance introducing this song, Stuck in the Middle with You, which is, man, what a song for a torture scene. It's
iconic at this point.
It is.
Right?
It's iconic. It is iconic. And I think it's equally iconic because of the dance. You know what I mean?
His joy of the joy he takes in this moment is definitely feeds into, how iconic this scene is. I will say that in the 5 or so minutes leading up to this torture scene, we get the most, I wrote down the most 90s few minutes, because we get these punching sound effects that are straight out of every like early 90s action movie. Those made me giggle. We also get nice guy Eddie walking in the most 90s windbreaker and humongous mobile phone I've ever seen.
I know.
So I marked out big for those.
Apparently that's his actual windbreaker, Chris Penn's windbreaker. R.I.P. Chris Penn.
Sorry, Chris Penn.
Yeah. So, he comes in hot, and I think we have a lot of back and forth here that honestly, for the sake of time, we won't dig into. But the moral of the story is nobody agrees on who the rat is. Everybody's, pointing literally the guns at each other. And I think what's interesting is that, this is a guy, nice guy Eddie, who definitely has some biases in this situation. And he's coming in without all the information, is I think what it comes down to. Yes. He just doesn't know what happened on the scene. And to your point, he is on Mr. Blonde's side no matter what. He's also on Daddy's side. Can we have a sidebar about calling your father Daddy when you are a grown-ass man? I need it to not. Super gross. I hate it. It gives me
maybe it's a mobster thing. I feel like AJ called Tony Soprano Daddy a few times during The Sopranos.
Let me also rephrase that. I don't mean a grown-ass man. I mean a grown-ass adult. When women or men call their father Daddy as grown adults, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't know why. So that really grosses me out. He has this whole bias about the people in the room, and he's ready to kill people over it. Yeah. He's ready to literally shoot them, dead over it. And what ends up happening?
We've got one more big thing to go over, I think, before we get to the climax.
I'll allow it.
That's okay. Because as they leave, we see Blonde torturing the cop. He's going to shoot this cop. And God, it does not pay to be named Marvin in a Quentin Tarantino movie, because this poor cop gets tortured, gets his ear cut off, eventually gets killed. And then in Pulp Fiction, Marvin gets shot in the face. So don't be Marvin in a Tarantino. If Quentin Tarantino sends you a script and is like, hey, do you want to play Marvin? No, don't do it.
Also, Marvin immediately very concerned with his looks. Can we just sidebar for a second? How do I look? What do you mean, how do I look? You just got your ear cut off. Do you think you look great, bro? No.
I do like, though, when Orange yells at him and is like, I'm fucking dying, and you care about like how you look. Like, he gets fucking pissed. But with that in mind, we segue to the Mr. Orange flashback, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the film for me, of finding out Orange has been the rat this whole time, the guy who's been bleeding out on the floor. We get the story of how he sort of infiltrated, and we see sort of how he built a little bit of trust here, and how some of it, and we get the most, I think this might be the longest flashback in the film. We get like a good 10-15 minutes of this.
Yeah, you get his commode story, which I'm not even going to go into. It was like very anticlimactic for me. We spend a lot of time. I mean, it's fun. It's not like it's not a fun addition, but we spend a lot of time invested in him learning the commode story.
Okay, but as a former theater teacher, I appreciated the commode story, because it's like, here's how you memorize dialogue.
Kid who had to memorize lines. Hey, shout out to my theater kid homies. This was absolutely what life was like, right? You were walking around in all the places, memorizing lines for days. So 100% the realism is there for sure. But I also just expected something slightly more interesting from the commode story. It was very anticlimactic in the like what it really happened. I remember thinking cute puppy and being super excited to see the German Shepherd.
I will say that I like the way that Tarantino, though, the way he plays this out of, there's sort of a flashback within a flashback here, because the initial shot is him sitting with, I guess, his coworker, another cop, and talking about how he's in on the deal. And then
I think it's his boss. You know what I mean? Okay. I think it's his, it's his handler, his boss, whomever. Yeah. And he's telling him how he's in, and then he says, did you use the commode story? And then we flash back and we see it. And the way that Tarantino tells that is we see him getting the script the first time and sort of practicing it. Then we see him in his room practicing the script. Then we see him practicing it with the handler again. And then we see him telling it live. And the way that he breaks that up of the story being told throughout these different settings. And then you get to the point where it's a little bit meta, to be honest.
Because it's cutting to a recorded video version of this story that never really happened. I did quote, I can't do air quotes in a podcast, right? No. But this story that never really happened.
He did air quotes in case you missed it.
This beer is delicious.
It is delicious. Yeah, I think it's, it's a cute story and it plays okay. I just wanted was waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's all. That's all. But
That's fair.
but I think it's good. I like the flashback. I like that you get more invested in this guy in the flashback. I also like that you do get to see him and Mr. White bonding and prepping, and so
Mm-hmm.
you get a little bit more of that story of like why they're already such homies, and how Mr. White's like, hey, it can't be him, and it's because they're friends and they're shooting the shit and they're spending hours in the car prepping for this thing. And it's, it kind of speaks to like the humanity of these folks, even if they're hardened criminals and they're supposed to just be professionals. They're
Yeah.
not. They're also just people.
Yeah, they're human. I like the scene when he's first leaving to go get in the car. We get sort of a taxi driver homage there of him talking to himself in the mirror and saying, like, they don't know. You're going to be fine, and hyping himself up
Yeah.
of like, hey, you're in the shit now. Don't get caught. But we also get, to my earlier points, we get a scene of him digging a wedding ring out of a coin jar and putting it on. How did you read that?
I think that was just part of his undercover character. I don't think it was intended to be, I don't think he's actually married. This
Yeah.
guy has comic book accoutrement all over his apartment. He's not married.
Wow,
let me
you
just
are
say.
hurt. You're breaking a lot of hearts out there today,
I'm not. I'm
Mackenzie.
just saying, like, I know how these things work, and I have a lot of nerdy things all over my home, but I'm telling you, there's not a lot of people who are like, hey, let's have a poster of the thing in the living room. Like that's not gonna fly more often than not. That's all I'm saying.
That's
But
fair.
but yeah, I think it was a prop for sure, but I think it was a
Yeah.
prop that he had used is the point,
Hmm.
right? It's like it has clearly been established at some earlier point in the timeline. And so he's got to kind of commit to it, was kind of my read on it.
Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite theory of the bunch is the ring is his reminder of right now I'm someone else. So
Yeah.
I'm personally not married, but it's my
This
reminder to
is the
stay in
persona
character.
that I am playing. Yeah.
On the flip side, or just to sort of add a little more evidence to my thing, this might be a little bit of a stretch, but I thought that maybe if he was a formerly married man who then, discovered that he was gay, maybe this would be sort of a cover of like, I don't want these gangsters who are pulling this heist, not the most accepting men in the
To
world, to
know that
know
I'm
that I'm
gay.
gay. So let me put on a
Yeah.
ring, tell them I'm married. Who knows, what that means to the Mr. White
Right.
story. And again, guys, I'm
Well,
not saying I believe this 100%. I'm just saying if you want to read it this way, the evidence is there.
listen, the beauty of all forms of art is that you get the luxury of interpreting it however the fuck you want. And I think it's a
Hmm.
really interesting interpretation of why potentially these things could be happening. And I think it's absolutely true that you could use it as a shield. Whatever the
Hmm.
shield is, right? Like maybe it's a shield for homosexuality. Maybe it's a, hey, I don't want to be distracted on this job by women or whatever else is happening, right? Like I
Yeah.
just need to do the job, and this is a part of that. This is the prop that helps me do that for whatever reason. So I do think it's worth looking at and wondering why it happens for sure.
Cool. But to your point earlier on, we get these scenes of the initial bonding of the team. We get them getting their names. We get Mr. Pink
Mm-hmm.
being a little salty
Oh
about
my
his.
God, the Mr. Pink with the name went on forever. And I'm like, listen, if I'm Lawrence Tierney, aka Joe, I would have smacked the shit out of this guy. Be like, can we move on? Your name is Mr. Pink, kid.
So, Mackenzie, what would be your Mr. or Mrs. or Miss name if you were pulling a bank heist? What would be your color?
Okay, I know that they were fighting over this in the movie, so there's going to be much debate here, but obviously it would be Mr. Black or Miss
Oh,
Black.
wow. You're one of those. Everybody wants to be Mr. or Mrs.
It's
Black.
not that. It's my literal favorite color. This is just a true fact about me as a person. You know this. This is my favorite color. I wear black 80% of the time. So yeah, I think it would be Ms. Black or Mrs. Black or, whatever.
Okay,
What about
fair.
yours?
I mean, my favorite color is red, but I feel like Mr. Red doesn't have much of a ring to it. I'd probably go with like a shade, like a Mr. Burgundy. Mr.
Ooh,
Burgundy.
I like a
That's
Mr. Burgundy.
you
You thought
three
about this.
syllable
Don't
colors.
lie. You were like,
Hell yeah! This
what's
is
the move?
when was
I'm
the last time we recorded? Like 6 days ago. I've had
I
6
didn't
days to
get
think
time
about
to
it.
think about mine. Yours sounds so much cooler than mine in retrospect, but I love a Mr. Burgundy. I think that's a great choice.
So we have these scenes of them bonding. I really liked the initial scene in the car where they're driving and just sort of, again, another random Tarantino offshoot conversation. but you sort of see Orange looking for his moment to speak of, I don't want to get caught here because I will be murdered, but him sort of getting comfortable, and then they're having a conversation about what actress played
They're talking about
so-and-so.
movies, and he's like,
Yeah.
that's not the actress, you dumbass.
Yeah, so he chimes in, and then they start cracking wise, and you see him loosen up. I thought that scene, even though it does go on, to your point, a little bit long with a lot of the stuff in here, I thought that was cool to see this moment of, we're not going to see the heist, but we want to show you what's important, which is how this guy earned their trust. Then my favorite Keitel line in the entire movie is when he's talking about cutting off fingers and how to get people to talk and blah, blah, blah. And then there's this pause, and he says, I'm hungry. Let's go get a taco. Not tacos. Singular. Let's go get a taco.
A taco. Yeah. I don't know. It's widows talking about tacos. You know what I mean? I just was not, I was like, okay, I'm a little bit of a snob. You know, we here in Austin have the best tacos. So I was just like, I bet it's gross. That was my reaction. I was like, I bet it's not a great taco. But we're gonna
I don't actually believe this, but maybe the reason he said let's get a taco is he wanted to split it while they're holding hands.
I see you peppering in your little theory.
Maybe they eat their way to the middle, like Lady and the Tramp. Ooh,
wouldn't that be adorable? I have in my notes the bromance is real, so yes. I think there is some real deep love here for sure. Yeah. Maybe they just shared the taco, but then there's this really, I mean, I think the crux of this bromance, if we're bringing your whole theory to a close here, is there's this very serious betrayal that happens.
Yeah.
And this I would say is the real climax of the movie, of their moment where, as a point of honor, is the way that I read it, is Mr. Orange admits that he's the cop to Mr. White when everyone is dead, and it's him and Mr. White, and that's it. And maybe the cops are coming in, maybe they're not, because as we know, Joe just came in, so in theory they should be moving in any minute now. And he doesn't owe him that at that moment per se. He's probably going to be rescued, or he's going to die, to be honest, right? Like, he's going to die from bleeding out, or Mr. White's going to die before he can tell him. There's nothing making him confess, but he chooses to. And I think it's this very honor among thieves moment of, you just sacrificed two people that you cared about to protect me, a man you don't know well and maybe are in love with, genuinely. Maybe that's what it is.
That was going to be my point. Did he say it honor amongst thieves, or did he tell him for another reason?
I think it could be either way, right? I mean, it can be, you just sacrifice something for me, even if I don't feel this way about you. Who's to say it's not an unrequited thing, right? Or who's to say it's not a, hey, I love you like a brother.
Yeah, I think, Janelle disagreed with my theory as well. She read it more as just a bond, as you said, between brothers, especially with the fact that throughout the film, Mr. White refers to Mr. Orange's kid. So it does feel as almost like I'm going to see
brother
you rise
vibes
through the ranks, a big brother type thing. So if this whole time you guys have been listening to me and thinking I'm full of shit, you're not alone. My girlfriend also poked some holes in my theory.
But that's like a regular Tuesday,
Yeah. So... anything to say about the entire shootout before we get to that moment? Like, obviously everyone shows back up. Mr. Blonde is now dead, and we get this standoff. Anything about the standoff itself that stands out to you?
Nothing that's shocking. I think generally, like, emotions are heightened. People are being protective of their people. As anonymous, I think one of the big notes throughout this is just, as anonymous as they are all trying to be, they're not actually. Yeah. Right. They have not only connections to one another from what they know about each other, whether it be their names, and Joe knows Mr. White, and Joe knows Nice Guy Eddie, and whatever, all this stuff, or their familia, or whatever it is. They know each other to some degree, at least part of this crew does. But beyond that, I think the thing that resonates is they have come to know each other in other ways as well. And they have, again, established these bonds one way or another, and they're choosing sides. I think that's the big thing here, is they're choosing sides, and Mr. White is choosing Mr. Orange.
Yep.
And we may joke like that your theory might be garbage or whatever, but maybe it's not. I think it's a very worthy theory to consider, of there is, in a short amount of time, some sort of love here. And whether it's homosexual love, or if it's truly just brotherly love, it's a quick turnaround for them to have
That's
bonded the way that they
yes.
have, and for them to be willing to literally
Yeah,
sacrifice
die
their
for each
lives.
other. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know how long this heist planning was going on, but let's say it even was what, 6 months? Is that long enough for you to develop, a relationship, a friendship with somebody so
And I
much
think
that
it's
you
implied that it's
sacrifice?
not even that
Yeah,
long.
it
You know what
felt
I mean?
quick to me. I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure.
But even if it was, to your point, I think it's fair to say that that's quick,
Yeah.
right? And but I think it's even less, and so I think some of that is instinctual, is what I'm
Hmm.
saying. Like they've developed these instinctual bonds with one another that are very important to them. Again, enough to die for, and
Yeah.
I think that in and of itself, again, even if it's just a brotherly love, is a really poignant part of the story, and it is something that is pretty heartbreaking in that moment of, did he or did he not kill Mr. Orange
I think he
because
did.
of that news?
I
And I
think he
think
did.
that's up for debate.
Yeah. I think, it's up for debate, but I will say that probably like the most heartbreaking moment of this is when they are both sitting there on the ground, shot, bleeding out. They both know they're likely to die here. We get this shot of Mr. White sort of massaging Mr. Orange's face, like, again, comforting him. This very, like,
Yeah.
I don't know what term you want to use for it, but just affectionate way.
Affectionate,
Yeah, affectionate
soothing.
way.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Orange gives him the news, and he continues to sort of stroke his face, but then it becomes a more angry, when you.
But he kind of wails.
Mhm.
And that's the thing about it that actually got me, of like, it doesn't feel just angry to me.
Painful.
It feels painful, sad. The betrayal of it is palpable. And I don't know that his first instinct is anger. I definitely feel like it's
Mhm.
pain. And the question mark for me is, does he get quick enough for this scenario and what's obviously about to come in? Does he get to anger quick
Mhm.
enough to make the decision that it's implied that maybe he made?
Yeah.
You can't tell 100%, at least for me. And maybe that's like, I joke that I'm always a pessimist, or at least a realist. But maybe that's like the deep-seated optimism of me, where I felt like maybe he couldn't do it.
I personally, I would read it as he does. I think they intentionally, maybe for budget reasons, sort of zoom in on Mr. White's face so that we don't see the trigger be pulled on like a full-on headshot, because he's got his gun to Mr. Orange's head. But based on the timing of the shots you hear one bullet, and then you hear a bunch of other bullets being shot, and you see White flail back.
Yeah, but there's theories that that's because the cops are already in there. There's theories that that's a warning shot.
I mean, I suppose, but what's the point of giving a warning shot if then you rattle off 20 more?
Well, they're like saying freeze. They're saying freeze, and then they keep shooting him. And there's multiple cops, so you don't know like what one cop does and another cop, gets trigger happy or whatever. I like that you don't know, I guess, is my thing. I don't want to assume that I know one way or the other. Is maybe my thing. I like that it's open to at least some level of interpretation of, do you think he was so betrayed and so angry, which again would be valid, to just straight up kill him? Or do you think he doesn't get the chance to either decide or doesn't get the chance to pull the trigger because of the other cops coming in? I think it's interesting either way.
I mean, the cops come in and say, drop the gun, don't do it, we'll blow you away, blah, blah, blah. They're giving him options. So the fact that they do eventually start firing while this person has a gun to the head, I don't know. That speaks to, we don't need to decide who's right or wrong here. I think the more interesting question, which ties into our topic last week of Hateful Eight, where we said this probably has the highest mortality rate of any Tarantino film. Do you think Mr. Pink survives? Because we hear him run outside, we hear a bunch of sirens and gunshots outside before the cops come into the building. So, any guesses there? What's your interpretation of Mr. Pink's end of story?
I think he gets away.
Gets away.
I think that
like he dodges all those.
Well,
bullets?
not gets away. Like gets out of the. No. Gets away. Like, I think he gets out alive.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I
Arrested.
think he gets out alive. I think he's arrested. I think he goes to jail. Very likely. I don't think this is supposed to be a win for anyone. I think that's the point of not only this film, but a lot of Tarantino's films, right? Like there's no real winners in some of these stories for all kinds of reasons, or there are very few. But I loved Steve Buscemi's take on this. His joke or interview, I think maybe 20 years later, 25 years later or something like that after this was that he likes to liken it to that this guy got free and his penance is that he is now working in that diner in Pulp Fiction and not
it's a direct
not
sequel.
getting tipped well as a result because he was the non-tipper. And I just sort of love that fate for him, to be honest.
Yeah, we've come full circle from a couple weeks ago. I like that a lot. Yeah, awesome. Well, that's Reservoir Dogs, y'all.
That's Reservoir Dogs, guys. It's intense. It's the shortest of Tarantino's films, as we said, but boy does it pack a fucking punch in a short period of time. And we've talked about it almost as long as it fucking ran. So with that in mind, we're gonna wrap up really quickly with our respective ratings. So what did you think, Lemar? Would you put this?
I got to reflect back on my last few weeks of Tarantino-vember. So I know I gave Pulp Fiction, I think, a 9.9, and Inglourious maybe like a 9.8 or 9.6. Hateful Eight, I think I gave like a 7.5 on a first watch and an 8 on a second watch. So this one, I'll go 8.5. It's not perfect. It's Tarantino trying a lot of stuff and sort of finding his footing as an individual filmmaker, and he does a lot of stuff really, really well, and we see some flashes of how great he's going to become.
Yeah.
But I think there are things to find, not wrong with it, but things that could have been done better. And it does feel like, to your point earlier, a little bro-y and a little over the top. But yeah, I dig it. It's not perfect, but I'd give it like an 8.5.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I won't reiterate them all, but I agree with most of them. I think I'll just wrap it up with I am going to continue to be the Russian judge in this scenario, apparently. So I'm gonna come in at like a 7.5. Okay. I found, I will attribute it to like budget limitations. The creativity is there, the core is there. There's all kinds of things there that make this a great flick and a really good writing and a precursor to all the great work to come, I think, from Tarantino. But I think it's his weakest showing, to be honest, for lots of reasons as far as production value and stuff like that. And even just, some shooting errors and things that you just learn about as you watch it. So I would say like 7.5, but it's an incredible first showing for a first time director. I think there's no argument there.
When you say that part of your rating had to do with production values, if there were a Transformer in Reservoir Dogs, how much would that affect your score? Like, would you add like a 0.5 or only like a 0.3?
I'm going to go like a 0.2. It doesn't do a lot for me, the Transformers, but
it does something.
It does something.
So do better, Quentin. Is what Mackenzie's
get a
saying.
fucking Transformer in there. We're done with you. No, we're just kidding. Okay.
Wonderful.
Well, you guys have been so patient with us again. We talked about this one for a while. Thank you for listening. Also, for sitting through 4 weeks of Tarantino and Tarantino-vember's first annual, we hope, occurrence. I think this was a great one. We'll have to come back to it next year around this time yet again. What do you think?
This has been a blast, and I so appreciate you being so willing to say, fuck it, and let's do this for 4 weeks. But I think that for December, we don't want every month to be like a theme month. We don't, the obvious thing would be, let's do some Christmas movies. We might do some of that, but I feel like we need a little bit of a feminine touch after how much Tarantino we've done. What do you think?
Y'all, we need to inject some estrogen into this podcast because it has been 4 weeks of bromances, a lot of just really intense, I think, material. So definitely come back the first couple weeks of December. We're going to lighten the load a little. We're going to do a couple conversations. We're going to talk about some Clueless. We're going to talk Sofia Coppola. We're going to have some nice lighthearted content, really good, strong content, but still some lightness nevertheless. And then, to Lamar's point, we will be doing a little bit of some holiday stuff. Nothing too crazy. We do want to touch on some of that for you guys. But for now, go ahead and have a drink and watch a thing. Cheers.
Oh, yeah. Later. Cheers.
Remote cheers. Clink.
Remote
clink,
cheers.
Clink.